What is up, guys? Welcome to my review of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. I probably am just going to call it Mad Max Furiosa for the rest of forever. So Mad Max Fury Road was a massive hit that came out damn near a decade ago now, which was the fourth chapter in the Mad Max films. It was the first to feature Tom Hardy, and to my surprise, as well as a lot of other people who are familiar with the franchise, Mad Max was actually kind of a side character in his own movie, and Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron in that film, kind of was the main star, the main drive of the story, and became an absolute fan favorite. Now, supposedly George Miller has had an idea to do this Furiosa movie as well as another Mad Max film that's kind of branching off of Fury Road, and it's just taken 9 years to get there. But Furiosa is essentially a prequel that is telling the origin story of Charlize Theron's character, played here by Anya Taylor-Joy, throughout most of the film. And in this prequel, they explore the story of how Furiosa was kidnapped as a young child, how her mother was murdered by Dementus, who is played very entertainingly by Chris Hemsworth here, how Dementus gets into cahoots with Immortan Joe, who was the lead antagonist of Fury Road, as well as how Furiosa gets into cahoots with Immortan Joe, leading up, setting all the events in place for what eventually kicks off the last film. Now, Mad Max Fury Road is a massively high bar that is just a movie that kind of defines action for at least a generation alongside John Wick. So walking in with the expectations that Furiosa was going to reach those levels was never something that I had on my mind, but I did have my concerns on what story they're going to tell that's going to merit going through this whole origin story. So, did Mad Max Furiosa find a nice place in this franchise? Does it add to Fury Road, or is this one of those chapters where I kind of feel like we should have just looked forward rather than backward? Starting off with the positives, if you like the high-octane, chrome, gasoline-fueled action extravaganza that was Fury Road, this very much keeps up with that style of movie. It's the very same aesthetic. It's going for a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same mob mentality with the war rigs and the support vehicles and the guys painted up in white and "Witness me!" That is kind of the selling point of the Mad Max franchise. This is an apocalypse film where it's almost like Fast and Furious after the world has died, and they continue that on with Furiosa. It's a lot of car crashes and explosions and chases and pursuits, just a whole ton of desert vehicle carnage that is an absolute blast to watch. It's not quite as mile a minute, no pun intended, as Fury Road, but the amount that we get here is still plentiful. It's still most of the runtime, and it's entertaining yet again. Chris Hemsworth is great as Dementus. This is just one of those guys that's a bona fide movie star. And when I consider somebody a movie star, it's somebody that can literally do anything. He can do the comic book stuff, he can do comedies, he can do drama, he can do action. Here, he's playing a very despicable character that just has no moral code and has no guidelines whatsoever of what is right or what is wrong, and does some of the most vicious things that we have seen in the Mad Max franchise, and yet he's fun to watch the entire time. Even when something horrific is going on that he has set in motion, his dialogue and his charisma as he rattles off that dialogue kind of makes it impossible to fully hate him. Anya Taylor-Joy is good in this role, and I want to make sure that I enunciate good, because I feel like I've seen a lot of people say that she's just like magnificent and this is the greatest thing she's ever done. I've seen her do a lot better. I don't think it's her fault. I think there's some room to give the character more to do here, which we'll get into. She does very good. She does as good as I would expect her to do with this role. She's not as good as Charlize Theron in the role, in my opinion. She's not nearly as captivating as it was in Fury Road, but she's good. For the lead character, for somebody that you're following through in this story, she does a good job. I did appreciate the world building. This is very much branching off of Fury Road directly. This isn't necessarily a movie that stands on its own or is trying to, build out the post-apocalyptic world beyond Fury Road. It just takes the lore that was established in that movie and further explores a lot of things that we didn't really take the time to explore in the last film, like Bullet Town and all these other little factions that are tied in with Immortan Joe, and how the trades work and how exactly everything works on a political level. And I thought it was interesting. Those are the parts of the movie that the prequel side of things I feel like actually merited the existence of this film. I'll get into my thoughts on prequels in general here shortly, but more times than not, I find myself grasping for like, what is the point? What are you going to tell me here that really made this movie need to exist? And those are the things that I latched onto the most, just making me understand the world of Fury Road a little bit more. Moving on to the mixed, and this is where most of my thoughts of this film lies. First and foremost, as I just kind of started to dive into, prequels in general aren't typically my thing. That's just my taste. I'm sure a lot of you love prequels. You like going back and further exploring things and, you know, uncovering mysteries and giving answers to things. More times than not, I don't. More specifically with horror, but in general, prequels to me, I always just kind of feel like I want to move forward. I want to go on to new stories. I don't want to go backwards and dive into things that I'm not really asking any of those questions. I wasn't asking to further explore the childhood of Furiosa. I wasn't asking to see this magical green land that she came from. I wasn't really asking to see any previous beefs that Immortan Joe had. Was it entertaining? Yes. Do I think that it serves as well as a precursor to the last film? Yes. Do I think that there's enough in this film to merit its existence? Yes. But I can't shake the feeling that I would have been much happier if we would have just moved forward with another Mad Max story or move forward with a Furiosa story post Fury Road. We got enough details and enough expositional dialogue giving us details of what this movie was going to further explore in Fury Road. I personally am just not somebody who needed to see it fleshed out. Moving on from that, there is much more of a use of color correction and CGI and more of like a comic booky look in this film, which a lot of people really got frustrated with when the trailers came out and they were talking about how horrible it looks and everything. Look, the CGI and the color correction and just the look of this film, I think is immaculate. I think that the CGI is seamless with everything that is going on, but you can tell that a lot of what you're watching is fake, where the massive, impressive appeal of Mad Max Fury Road especially was that so much of that was practical and it just looked real, it felt gritty, it felt raw, and you just sat there going, how the fuck did they do this? How did they film this? How did they stage these explosions and these crashes? This is insane. And when you have a film that really impresses you like that and stands the test of time over the last decade, not that that's a long time, because of how awesome it looks, and then you start to incorporate more of that computer fakery, you see through it a bit. So they utilize it well. They do a great job at making everything seamless, but I prefer the more raw approach of Fury Road and the previous Mad Max films. I don't want to see the Mad Max franchise start to feel more like all the other blockbusters that we get, where most of it feels like it's green screen and CGI and a computer doing everything. And the final mixed aspect for me is that George Miller very deliberately has these protagonists in these Mad Max films that are very sparing with their dialogue. And I feel like it's been ramped up exponentially in the last two films. I haven't rewatched them anytime recently, but I don't remember the Mel Gibson films being so much that way. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Mad Max Fury Road, Tom Hardy felt like he had maybe 15 lines in that entire movie, and it functioned just fine. Furiosa kind of has the same thing, where Anya Taylor-Joy doesn't have a whole lot to say here. Some of it's for narrative reasons because she's trying to keep secrets and she's trying to kind of float under the radar, but a lot of it is just that stylistic choice that George Miller has decided to use in these films, where I think he described it as, I want these movies to be like silent films with sound. I want the action set pieces to be the storytelling, not the dialogue exchanges. And I can appreciate that experimental attitude, and I think that he succeeds with it more than he fails. But for me, I'm very much a character and story person, and when you have protagonists that feel like they're overly quiet to where it's almost like to an annoying degree, it does make me disengage a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like we didn't really get as much out of Anya Taylor-Joy's Furiosa as I feel we did with Charlize Theron's version, because there's so much of this movie where she's just kind of quiet doing things, and I just wanted to feel her interactions with these characters more. Like, there's literally a character where we're given the impression that she has fallen in love with this guy, and I just never felt that because it's kind of expressed without dialogue. So Some people that'll work better for. Me, it held the movie back a bit. Now moving on to the negatives. While I would not say that some of the other Mad Max films were necessarily giving you stories to write home about, they've always been more about the spectacle and the action set pieces and everything. This film, I did feel like I needed a bit more story. If we're going to go back and focus an entire film after almost a decade wait on fleshing out this character further than we did in the last film, then it needs to be a story that I really get hooked into. And again, some people might get hooked into this more than me. This very tried and true run-of-the-mill revenge tale, I feel like I've seen this origin a bunch of times. I mean, somebody wrongs this person, so they spend a decade plus working their way up to be able to take their revenge. You know, and it's in a Mad Max post-apocalyptic style, but the inciting incident as well as the end goal is something that is very familiar. So that is another reason why I feel like a lot of the lore development and a lot of the world building of the Fury Road and Immortan Joe factions was the more interesting piece to me, because the Furiosa side was just like, okay, Chris Hemsworth pissed her off, wronged her, now we're going to go through this whole decade where she's going to try to build up to taking her revenge. Cool. Been there, done that. And as much as I love this world and the style of these movies, and it's very entertaining to watch, and it was cool diving back into this specific era of Mad Max, one thing that I've always liked about this franchise is it's one of the few long-running franchises that every installment kind of has its own vibe, kind of has its own flavor, its own style of action, its own look. And this is the first time where we've got two back-to-back that are aesthetically identical. And so naturally, because this is a prequel that's tied so directly to the last film, the aesthetic and the characters and the action and the gunplay and the explosions and everything are intentionally made to look identical to the last film. So there's a little bit in there where you're watching it that it does feel, even though it's cool that we've done this before, just from an action standpoint, you know, everything that I think they're called the War Boys, that they do with, you know, the sticks that explode and the spraying themselves with the chrome and witness me, like, it's all awesome in Fury Road. We're just seeing that again here. It's still cool. But I really want to see something else in this world. And the final negative that I had is that it's really just the last couple minutes of the film. This is not really a spoiler, because if you've seen Fury Road, there's nothing that I'm going to say here that you don't already know, but just skip to the rating if you don't want to know anything about this film, I guess. They make a decision to really take the end of this film and end it right at where Fury Road starts, to where you could kind of watch this and just almost cut both films together. And I understand the merit of that. I understand why you would want to do that, but I don't know if it fully works, because Anya Taylor-Joy to me doesn't look so much like Charlize Theron. Maybe if they got Charlize Theron to come in and stand in from that final scene and there's like a time jump or something where she's older and we're kicking off to Fury Road, it would have worked better for me. But she feels so much younger than what Charlize Theron's version of the character did. And so trying to visually tell me that this character is the same age, like the last 30 minutes of the film is within the week or so of what happened in Fury Road, didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so just, it's a minor nitpick, I guess. It's not that big of a deal, but for me, when it happened, I was like, no, you could have stopped the movie and it would have been fine. And there's like, you know, there's years between what happened in Furiosa and what happens to kick off Fury Road. That would have made more narrative sense to me. Saying that they're all within a couple of days of each other, that didn't work for me. And part of the reason that it didn't completely work, and this really has to do with something that happens earlier on in the film, I feel like there's not enough exploration between the issues between Furiosa and Immortan Joe. Like, this is all about her vendetta against Dementus, and I understand that. But there's obviously some bad blood and a revenge kind of a kick to what she is doing in Fury Road that is very much an issue with Immortan Joe that we don't really get to see built here. Like, he saves her essentially from Dementus and says, I will trade whatever with you, but I want her. Eventually she'll be one of my wives. A whole chunk of the film, she has to go into hiding and pretend to be a boy. And then eventually she reveals herself as a girl, but we never get to see Immortan Joe or anybody actually react to that. They just make her the driver of the war rig. It's not like, oh shit, it's that girl that I bought 10 fucking years ago. Where you been? Like, we never got any of that, nor any of the drama that would cause with her trying to break out of being one of his wives or whatever. So I don't know, there felt like there was a chunk of something missing there to tie the Dementus storyline that we're focusing on so heavily here, as we should, to the events of Fury Road. There's a chapter missing. All in all, guys, I did enjoy this. I had fun with it. I don't think it's as good as Fury Road by a long shot. I wouldn't even say it's as good as Road Warrior, but it's safely in the middle of this franchise for me. It's exciting, it's entertaining. If you love the style of Fury Road, I have a hard time believing you won't at least enjoy this on some level. But the story and the characters and a few of those decisions did leave a bit to be desired for me. But that's just because I'm a story and character guy. Action's awesome, but I need a little bit more. This one didn't quite give me enough. That's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my other most recent new release review, The Strangers Chapter 1, for you to check out. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.